What's going on, guys? Today we are going to be replacing this Dometic 6-gallon tanked water heater with a Girard tankless water heater, or on-demand water heater as some people call it. The only things you're going to need for this conversion for the most part is going to be the water heater and then the door kit as well. The door kit will depend on what water heater you currently have in place. They make door kits to replace Suburbans and Atwood Dometics and you name it. So if you're trying to replace your water heater, there is a specific door kit, and your water heater will not come with that door kit. So you'll have to look in the catalog and see which door kit it is that you need. You can find out which model you do have from the inside of the door. Once you open your door, you will see a label here, and you will have a model number of which model your water heater is, and that will tell you which door kit you need to replace. Before you start any of this, there's a few things you're going to need to do. You're going to want to turn the water heater off from gas and electric. You're going to want to turn your pump off. You're also going to want to remove any water pressure that's in the system. You're also going to want to make sure you shut off your propane, and then you're going to want to bleed it out of the system as well. And you can do that by igniting the stove until the stove kind of burns itself out to get all the propane out of the system. Once you're done with that, you're going to want to drain the water heater to get all of the water out of it, and that is why you wanted to relieve the pressure and make sure that it's not on. So once you get your drain released, stand back so you don't get all wet. You're going to let the water heater drain all of the water out of it completely before you start pulling it out, otherwise you're just going to make a mess and get your shoes and your pants covered in water. Alright, now that we have just about all of the water out of here, you're going to start the process of actually pulling the water heater out of the coach. Now, keep in mind that depending on how it was plumbed, you may be able to pull it out and then access all of the plumbing that's back there, or you may actually need to go inside and access behind a panel or underneath a cabinet so that you can get access to those plumbing fittings. It really depends on how they plumbed it and how much slack you have. So you'll pull all the screws out around here, and it should be free, but you're also going to have to cut the sealant around the exterior. There's going to be butyl behind there too, so it's going to be sticky, and that's where a nice little plastic pry bar like this one is going to come in handy. Alright, so now that we have all of the screws out from the perimeter of the outside, we'll razor out all the sealant here and then start prying it away. You'll want to be very careful when you're doing this. If you slip away with your knife, you're going to end up scratching the fiberglass. I've obviously got quite a bit of experience. I've cut plenty of these out, but I have made that mistake. So you want to be extra cautious about where you're pulling that blade so you don't slip. You're going to find loose spots in the sealant and it's going to want to take off, so make sure you're not doing that. And then once all the sealant is scored and cut, that's where the little pry bar is going to come into play with kind of getting behind everything. I recommend using a plastic pry bar for this reason, so you don't damage the side of the coach. You can find nice little sets of these plastic pry bars. A lot of times they're called like body tools or body and trim tools. So that one was actually pretty easy because they used the foam style tape here instead of the butyl. If you have butyl, there'll be a lot more work to that, I promise. So as you can see now, with everything pulled out, there's no butyl back here, so that was nice. It is nice if you have something like a table like this that sits at the approximate height, so you have something to pull on. So you kind of see if you have the slack. We're going to disconnect this LP line real quick so we can at least get that out of the way, and then we'll cover the wiring and the plumbing going over to this as well. So to remove the propane line, you are going to need two different wrenches. You need to keep one on the gas valve solenoid assembly so that you have it as a backer wrench, and then you're going to remove the fitting. Now, if you bled all the propane out of your system via the stove, you shouldn't have any propane coming out or any smell. If you do, it might be a problem. Make sure that propane is off. And then the only, I guess, difficult part of this is on this LP line, they have a gasket in here that's often filled with some kind of sealant from the back. So you'll have to peel most of that away so you can get the line through. I won't get that part on video because it's just tedious, and then we'll pull that LP line off. Sometimes you'll actually get lucky like I just did, and the sealant never really bonded to the hose, so you can just pull it through. As you can see, the sealant's all still there. One thing you want to be mindful of when cutting this is you need to reuse this LP line, so make sure you're not cutting it. And now that we have the LP disconnected and LP is off in the coach, we can kind of just tuck that out of our way for a few here, and we'll continue pulling this out and accessing everything else. In my situation here, I am lucky enough that I can get my hand back there and remove those fittings, but sometimes that may not be the case. You may not have that much slack. What you may end up having to do sometimes is actually getting up behind the cabinet or wherever the water heater is located and accessing the fittings that way. And then the same thing when you're installing, you may actually have to come back in here to make all your connections again. One thing you might want to keep in mind is these lines are still full of water, and your water heater is a low point on the coach, technically lower than all of the faucets and fixtures, so you may have a bit of water running out once you disconnect the lines, even though the tank is empty. So I recommend having a towel underneath there to try and catch some of that, or at least be ready to clean most of it up. I'll get my hands back here and get these water lines disconnected. They should just be threaded on most of the time with a plastic fitting that's really easy for you to access. And as you can see there, we had quite a bit of water come out, so that's the point in the towel. So I'm going to get this other one off, and then we'll cover getting the wires disconnected and figuring out where your wires are going to go on the new water heater. All right, so we've got both of those off, so now we can get the water heater out of here. Now your water heater may be equipped with an electric heating element. So there's going to really be two options depending on the water heater you're taking out. It may be hardwired, and you may have to disconnect the actual wiring, remove wire nuts from inside the junction box, or it may be plugged into an outlet like this one. Now this one is obviously much easier. We're just going to unplug it and take it out, but keep in mind that when it's hardwired, you're going to want to, make sure that the breaker is off for the water heater itself, and verify that there's no voltage at the source before you start taking it apart. And then once you get it disconnected, you're just going to kind of have bare Romex hanging out, and you can't have that. You need to put that inside of some kind of junction box. Now, one thing you can do is just buy a new outlet and attach it to that, and you can either add an outlet to whatever area is facing over here. You can abandon it back here and use that outlet for something in the future. Just remember that you can't just leave the bare Romex like this with bare ends on it hanging out back here. Even if the breaker's off, it's not a good idea. I'd recommend putting an outlet or some kind of junction box on the end to terminate that circuit. But instead of terminating a circuit, like I said, your best option is to add an outlet, so at least you have an extra outlet to use no matter what you use that for. So now you get to your wiring, and when you're doing a tankless water heater, you're really only looking for power and ground, whereas on these tanked units, you're probably going to have 3-4 wires going to them. Now, on this one, the trick is on an Atwood Dometic, the white wire is the signal to tell the board it's time to turn on the electric side, and the orange wire is telling it to turn on the gas side. So because this panel already has the two options on it, and we're going to be eliminating the electric side, what you're going to be using is your known ground, which in this case is going to be the green wire, and I'm going to be using the orange wire. So the switch for the gas water heater will need to be on the control panel to activate the tankless water heater, the on-demand. So we're going to have the orange, and we're going to have the green. That's going to act as our hot and our ground, and we're going to cap off these other two wires because they're not going to be used in the install. Keep in mind you're going to have to look at your wiring diagram for what type of water heater you have, but essentially what you need to have is a line that has 12 volts and then a line that has a good ground as well. Again, that wiring is going to be different, and a test light or a multimeter is going to give you the answer you need. And again, if I turn the switch off for the gas water heater, this new tankless water heater will lose all of its power, but that's going to avoid running a whole new circuit to it and having two useless dead buttons on the control panel. You can do it however you choose if you do want to run dedicated 12 volts over to it from a fuse circuit and not have to have a switch on it, but this one in particular is going to be run off of the switch on the control panel. So even though the water heater has its own control panel to turn on, this will be activating the power to it on and off. So if this is off, nothing will work on the tankless water heater. Once this is on, the control panel will get power and you'll be able to activate it. Again, that's going to be your preference how you want to power the unit. Tanked water heater is going to go bye-bye. We're going to save that one for a future install, or maybe parts, depending on what it is. I always need a good Dometic. So now we have our hole, and we have the three things that we need to make this new tankless water heater work. I'm just going to protect that 12 volt line for a bit. We have cold water in, hot water out. This does have a bypass on it, which isn't really going to be necessary for the tankless water heater, but I'm not going to eliminate it. We're just going to leave that as it is in case they ever want to bypass it for any reason. Now the only problem being this might not be long enough to actually reach where the tankless water heater is going to hook up. It very likely will, just depends on how I get it all in here, and I'll probably have to do the hookups from the inside and pull that drawer out like I was showing you earlier, because once I get it in here I don't really have space to get it, and I don't want to pull too tight on those plumbing lines. So we have our plumbing lines, cold in, hot out, power, and then we have our LP as well. Again, that 120 volt outlet that we have over here is not going to be used because this tankless water heater does not have an electric feature like most of them. And we may have to do something with the blocking back here because this may not be at the right height. This was set up for a tank, and we want to make sure that we have some kind of blocking underneath the water heater so that it's not trying to solely rely on its grab with the exterior of the coach here. So we've got the new Girard out of the box, and somehow I got an empty bag that the control board is normally in. The control board is hidden down here. Normally they are inside of the water heater, but for some reason it just didn't make it to the bag, did it? So that's really all you're going to need is this control board and this water heater. So let's get that set up. Alright, so we've got the new tankless water heater out, and we'll just get all the caps off of it, but we can observe back here that we have the exact same connections with some minor differences. You have your LP line right here. That's where the LP line that came from the other water heater is going to go. You have your cold water in, hot water out, and that's where those two water lines are going to go. Then you have your wiring we talked about. We need a positive and a negative, which we found, and then these two wires here are going to go to the control panel. Depending on where you put the control panel, you're going to have to wire where this is going to go. You'll have to run wire to it. I know sometimes people just try and keep these close to the water heater, but it is nice having these in the bathroom so you can adjust your shower temperature. But that's again going to be up to the end user on where you want this to be and how hard it is to get the wires there to begin with. So the only thing I did off camera here was I took the ends off of this block, because this block does sit at the right height I need it to be for the back end of the water heater to sit on. So we will get our LP line connected, so I don't have to do that underneath there behind that cabinet, and I will get power connected, eliminate one more thing, and then the only thing I'll need to hook up is my control panel on these two blue wires and run those wires to where the control panel is going to end up. So we'll get the water heater in there, and I will start getting the lines on through that back cabinet, and then we're going to figure out where the controller is going to go, and then we'll figure out all the final stuff, which is getting your door kit on, cleaning up this sealant, and getting everything kind of finalized. As you can see so far, it's a pretty straightforward install. You should be able to just reutilize some of the stuff you already had. The only thing you may have to modify is plumbing, depending if it was hard pipes. You may have to kind of replumb that. Most of the time I find you don't have to, but again, just be prepared for the fact that you may need to actually kind of adjust some of the plumbing back here. So we'll get our power and ground hooked up at least. That'll save me two connections. I'm trying to dig behind a cabinet. If you'll notice, I took the Wagos off. Any of you guys who have been following me on TikTok for a while know that I can't stand Wagos, especially in an RV, because it's bouncing all over the road, and the Wagos tend to fail, if you will, after so much time. I find failed Wagos all the time in RVs because, again, they are bouncing down the road. So getting these hooked up, need one more connector here. Of course, I don't have any more blues over here. That's perfect. So we'll get these two wires hooked up at least. Crimpy crimp. And one more. Then we'll kind of shove this thing in the hole and try and get everything fitted into there. Another thing you might want to do is I'm going to make sure I tighten this before I get it in there. So again, it's one more thing I don't have to try and do, trying to access it from back there. So I've got the LP line hooked up. I've got both of these crimped. Now again, we're just going to get this in here, and then we're going to access it from the drawer cabinet back there. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is get this drawer out and disconnected. Next step is we're going to get some light back here. All right, so now that we got some light, you can kind of see what we're working with here. And this isn't the best angle. This may not be what you end up dealing with. This is what I'm dealing with. So it's going to be some kind of laying on my side. We're going to have to get this LP line kind of out of the way and get the water heater dragged back here the rest of the way. Get it where it's supposed to be. Clearly still sitting on top of this one on my block. So it can be a real pain sometimes, because if the coach wasn't built with the intention of a tankless water heater, it could just end up being your next headache, because now you have to make it fit. So I'm going to get these cables reorganized, these hoses out of the way, and try and finagle this. There's not a good way to get a camera angle in there while I'm doing it. So once I get that organized, we'll cover the next steps. So a bit of a dilemma that I'm having is I'm probably going to have to replumb some of this. As you can see, I got my cold line on, and the way I had to get it bent over to reach it, it's creating a kink. Same with when I try and get my hot one on. I'm kind of just creating a kink at the top of that line there and a kink at the top of that line there. So I'm gonna have to shorten some of that up and put some 90s on it so that they can reach a little better and not get kinked when trying to get them into the correct spot. I was kind of hoping I would avoid that. Again, like I said, you won't always have to do that, but on occasion, yeah, you are gonna have to modify the length or size of the plumbing. All right, so I've got my plumbing kind of cleaned up. I trimmed those down where necessary and got some new fittings on there on both the hot and the cold line. They no longer have a kink. They're cut to the right length. Now, the reason I didn't cover this on video is it's not a universal answer. Your situation is going to be much different than what this one is. Really, you're just gonna have to figure out, based on how your plumbing is routed, where your plumbing's gonna need to go or what adjustments you need to make. And like I said, this isn't all the time. You won't always have to make these adjustments. Sometimes you can hook it right up. It just really depends on how it was plumbed in the first place. You won't always have to eliminate the bypass, even though it's not necessary. But just keep in mind, your situation may be very different. Working with PEX is very easy. There's really only two tools involved, a PEX crimper and a PEX cutter. Not a bad tool to have in an RV if you own one, because you very likely will be replacing one of those fittings, and the cost of the tools you need will be far less than even an hour of labor taking it into your local dealership. So now that we've got plumbing hooked up and LP's hooked up, the power to the unit is hooked up here. The only thing we have left is getting the control board hooked up to the two blue wires and, of course, running wire to our desired location. Now, I'm kind of lucky because on the opposite side of this cabinet where the water heater is located is the bathroom, which is where I'm going to mount my control board. That's where you'd likely want it. So now is just figuring out how I'm going to get around the pocket door and likely get the controller somewhere in here. I'd like to have it on this wall, but of course with the sliding door, that's not really possible because I'll just end up smashing it. So put a little thought process into where that's going to go. This may even be a good spot. I don't know. It seems like an awkward spot, but I want to try and avoid having to run through the underbelly and across the coach to over here. I just got to see what obstacles I'm going to have in that wall. If I do have to go over here, I won't be too mad about it. It is a great location. I just don't want to have to fish wire through the underbelly and try and come up through here so that I can get onto this wall. But now that I'm thinking about it, that may be my best course of action, just so I'm not trying to dangle inside this wall and try to avoid this sliding door. Again, I won't cover too much about fishing the wire and stuff because every coach is going to be different on where you're mounting the water heater and where you have to route where your controller is going to go. So I'll cover a little bit of the wire fishing. I've got my fish rods going through the underbelly up here and coming out the other side. I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't see it from over here. Coming out the underside of the underbelly. So I'm going to grab some wire and pull it across the coach. So I have the other end of my rod coming from the underbelly here. And what that's going to allow me to do is get wire from where the water heater is there, under the coach, in the underbelly, and up to the wall right there. That's the goal, so that we can have the panel in the bathroom, which is the best place for it. Sometimes, of course, you can be lazy and just shove the controller in one of these cabinets or up on a wall here, but it just doesn't really serve a good purpose doing that. So once I get wire run under the floor, I will bring it up through into this cabinet because I already have things going down into the underbelly, and I will make a small incision in the wall there so that I can run it inside the wall and up the wall, and probably right about there is where I'm going to end up putting it. So I've sent one of my rods down from under the sink into the belly through an opening, and one of the key features of these rods is they glow in the dark. So if you charge it up with a flashlight first, as you can see, when you open up that dark underbelly, it's not very difficult to find that rod. So now I can pull wire down from that area to here, connect it to here, pull it all the way through the underbelly to over there, and then shoot it right up to where that water heater is, and makes it easy peasy. I don't got to pull the underbelly down or anything like that. So now I've got this rod that comes up from my underbelly, as I showed you guys down there, and I ran this one wrong, so I don't have my hook up here. So we're going to tape the wire to it, and I'm going to pull this down into the underbelly, and then I will attach it to the other rod, the one that's going through the underbelly and across, and pull it across, and then we'll shoot up to the water heater, and then I'll finalize that by taking the last bit of slack I have and running it up through the wall to get my control panel for the water heater right there. This is just some 16-2 sheath wire. You don't need much to power this control panel because it doesn't really use much power. It's more or less just for the signal. It's in like the milliamp range, so no worries of like wire gauge size. There's even occasion that we'll just use like bell wire or like thermostat wire and run it that way. I'm not a big fan of using thermostat wire because it's solid core, and as it flexes and moves around, you're very likely to get a break somewhere, and I like that this has a little bit thicker of a sheathing on it. So I'm going to get this kind of unwound. We'll get underneath there, pull it through, and pull it across the underbelly. So I have that rod right here. We're going to pull it down. Hope we don't really get stuck on anything, which already feels like we are, but we got through it. Just a little bit, a couple snags. And there's our wire right here. So then we will attach it to this rod here and shoot it across the underbelly and up and over there. All right, so we should be able to find our wire. Look at that. Pulled the wire through the underbelly, and now we are just going to shoot it up through where the LP line comes in and get it up to our water heater. And of course, secure any exposed cables and make sure everything's hooked up, and then we'll get the control panel hooked up. And would you look at that, fished it up right where the LP line came in, and now I have that end of the wire to connect to these two blue wires. So we'll get those crimped up. I'd love to show you all my crimping skills, but again, really tight space and kind of irrelevant. So we'll get that hooked up, and then we'll get over to the bathroom over here and get that control panel hooked up. So these control panels, the cover just pops off the front, and there's 2 screw holes to get it onto the wall. Now, of course, we got to run the wire into the wall, so we need to get a small incision into the wall. Make sure I'm not going directly on a stud. So I'll go right above where this switch is, because I know there's not going to be any kind of framing in there. And luckily, they have already run some wires up through the wall, so there's a nice opening, so I'll drop the fish rod right through there and pull that wire right up there. And the best part about paneling in RVs is you don't need really any special tools to make a small hole in the wall, because that's all I need to get through is that wire. You can actually just use a razor knife and cut a little square hole out. So really, all I have to do is take my razor knife, center myself up with my switch there, and I'm going to push the blade through, and I'll do that 4 times and make a little square incision. It's really all that it needs. And the razor blade will make a really clean hole versus trying to get a keyhole saw or anything like that in here. Bam. So now we have a nice little clean hole. We're going to shove the fish rod down there and hope we don't get stuck on anything along the way down, which, knowing my luck, probably will. So with that down into the wall, I should be able to come down in here and find that rod. Had to take a pause there because she was a real pain to get to, but you can see the glowing rod there. It's the joys of having the glow sticks. Finally managed to get it out, so we'll get the wire taped up to that, pull her through, and get my control board mounted. Got the wire taped to the end of the rod. Did have to make my hole just a tad bit bigger. Let's make sure we're not getting snagged, because I felt like it was not going to fit with the wire on the end of it as well. It's okay, because the control panel will cover it. And there we are, wire out of the wall all the way to the other side of the coach, through the underbelly and up to the water heater. And to be honest with you, through the cuts it seemed pretty quick. Altogether, this is probably maybe 45 minutes worth of work. Granted, I have a lot of experience doing this, so somebody who's kind of new at it or not familiar, I mean, plan on maybe it takes you an extra hour or so, but hopefully not quite that long. And you may not have to do this. Your water heater may be located somewhere near the bathroom, so you may not have to worry about running all this wire. You also don't need to have the control panel in the bathroom, but because most people adjust the shower temperature, I like to make sure that I get them in the bathroom, or at least near the shower, as close as possible. Even if it means I'm going to lose a little bit of time trying to get it in the right spot. I guess it's just a work ethic thing or something like that. Taking a little bit more pride in my work, taking those extra steps. So if it's important to you to have it here, take those few extra steps, take that extra hour, and get your wire rerouted so you can have your control panel in the bathroom. Now that I've got water in the system and see that I have no leaks, get our temp set, turn on some hot water. You see we have flow, we have our fan operating, and there we have flame. It's lit, water temperature is going up. Perfect. Everything's working as it should. So now it's just time to clean everything up. Now for the fun part, which is the door kit. We are going to use butyl tape and get all the inside of this flange sealed, so in the case that water makes it past the caulk, because one day it will not penetrate, it will not get to where the screw holes are, and it will not make it inside the coach. I've seen people use all kinds of things behind here, but really the foam sealing tape or butyl tape is really the only thing you should be using on a water heater door.
So we get a nice piece of this all the way around, and then get her screwed on. The door kit is probably the easiest part of this installation, but at the same time still one of the most crucial parts, because if you mess this part up, you're going to have a leak. Every time it rains, water's going to creep through this door and into your RV. So you want to make sure you don't skip any steps here. You want to make sure you've got that butyl all the way around and sealed up nice, and we're still going to do a bead of sealant once we're done too. So let's get this door on and get her sealed up. So get your door kind of centered on there. We'll get one screw to start, and then continue with the perimeter. You have some screws on the inside, which are also going to help keep the water heater itself in place, and that's it. So I'll run the rest of these screws in real quick. Now that we're attached, we're going to follow that with a nice healthy bead of sealant in the color of your choice. It's all going to depend on the color of your coach and your preference. The best tip that I can give you with this is to make sure that you tool it good, and make sure that you do not shut the door right away. If you shut that door right away, what you're going to do is smack that door right into your sealant, and you'll probably never get your door open again without cutting all that sealant out. Ask me how I know. I've made that mistake more than once, so I'm giving you the heads up so you don't do the same thing. Don't be afraid to use a little extra, because again, you'll be tooling it in the end. All right, so we've tidied up out here. Off camera, I did skip one step on cleaning up the sealant on this side. You can remove the 4 screws that hold the door on, and it makes it a lot easier. I sometimes opt for that. It just really depends on how much time you have. You know, in my situation, obviously when you're keeping things in bays, we have to keep things moving, so we'll try and do them fast. And I'll sometimes opt for the door coming off. If you want to make it easier and not worry about losing those tiny screws again, you can get the outside, wait for it to dry, close it, and then get this side. Where these are, since they're kind of bumped out, the butyl tape doesn't always sit flush. So try and make sure you get some extra sealant inside of these little pockets here from the outside, so that way you just can guarantee that it is 100% sealed. I always am very cautious of leaks, so I'm always going to double, triple, and quadruple check that I'm not leaking back there, because even the slightest drip will turn into a bunch of water damage on all this wood after prolonged use. I am going to tidy up these wires a little more, because otherwise what I know is going to happen, eventually they'll get caught in these drawer tracks and get ripped out. So another common issue I find in RVs from the manufacturer, just like this piece of Romex that sits right there, that is just asking to get jammed up in that drawer track. So I'll clean that stuff up. Not super necessary to get that stuff on camera, but I do like to point out the obvious, so maybe you guys can pay attention to some things like that too. The last step was getting this control panel here screwed to the wall, and it is now mounted nice and straight and in the bathroom area. So now that everything is done, we have hot water. So you'll see that the little shower symbol is detecting the water flow, the fan has kicked on, and now we have flame. You'll see the temperature rising, and what do we have? We have hot water on demand, which is perfect, because I need to wash my hands after doing all that. I hope after watching this video, you guys have a little bit better of an understanding of how simple it may be to install a tankless water heater on your own coach. There may be a few roadblocks along the way. It's not cut and dry. In some cases, I'd say about half of them, it really is cut and dry. It's as simple as, you know, the plumbing, everything fits. There's no modifications. And if you're not super picky about your control panel being in the bathroom, then you can mount the control panel closer to the water heater and not have to fish wires through the underbelly and all that stuff. That's just how I did it. It's all going to be up to your own preference. If you guys are interested in seeing more tips, tricks, tours, install videos, and fun facts about RVs, make sure you guys press that subscribe button.